Hello, my name is Protik Mukhopadhyay. I'm an entrepreneur and an author. I'll be hosting the Reimagine Sales Systems podcast, where I'll be bringing some of the industry thought leaders who will be sharing their go to market strategies for their business systems. All right, listeners, I'm so glad to have Brian Flood today with me. He's the VP of IT, Business Systems, and Data at Fastly. Welcome, Brian, to our podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Brian. So, Brian, if you can share a little bit about your personal journey in the enterprise world and how you came to lead the business systems teams at Fastly, it'll be really interesting for our listeners.
Sure. So I actually started my career in analytics, and I spent a long time in healthcare, about 18 years. And what I was doing in healthcare initially was taking all of this data from their various systems to look at how insurance companies underpaid their bills. And it was a really interesting insight into how to put data together from various systems that was really complex. And that was really the beginning of sort of my my data career. And I spent 18 years in healthcare, saw the evolution into electronic medical records. I got into some Epic medical record implementations. Epic is one of the largest medical record systems. And it was a really fascinating sort of introduction into how things could work. Because in healthcare, everything is so complex. You buy Epic and it does everything. It's like a platform that you run everything from scheduling patient visits to tracking, patient vitals and numbers to running your billing. And it's made up of a bunch of components, but it all works together as one giant platform. About 10 years ago, I sort of, decided I needed a change. I was done with healthcare. So I went to a company named OpenDNS. And that was sort of my first foray into tech, into, the startup world. And they had asked me to build out an analytics platform and sort of create BI. And I had done my master's degree. I got my MBA, and I spent a lot of time in school looking at the SaaS model, looking at metrics like MRR and churn. So I had presented a lot of that to the CEO, and he liked what I had to say. So we started building that, and just like any good data analytics practitioner would, I complained about the quality of the data because they were a startup and they had poor processes, poor data quality, and it was still a startup. So he said, "Well, go fix it. Go fix the system." And I was like, "Well, I'm an analytics guy. I don't know how to deal with Salesforce." And so I learned a bunch about Salesforce, a bunch about NetSuite, and eventually, hired admins that knew what they were doing, and really started to adopt this model of let's build these systems around the data that we need to measure the business. And that became a very powerful model that I've tried to replicate since. And as well as bringing in that mindset that I learned or sort of got introduced to in the healthcare world, that in a SaaS world, it's not that different than an Epic, where we have all of these big components that you can fit together that you run your business on. You're running procure to pay, you're running quote to cash, you're running all of those standard business practices. And if you integrate all this stuff together, it's really one big platform that is made up of components that you can organize to run all those processes, as well as generate all the data you need to measure your business. That company got acquired by Cisco. And so I spent a couple of years in Cisco kind of learning what that scale looked like, as well as understanding things like the channel. There's such a huge channel program. And then went to a company in GitLab, who are 100% remote, absolutely fascinating company, kind of an open core tool that has a commercial component to it. And then eventually landed at Fastly, with some of my former OpenDNS colleagues, that were really interested in could I replicate what I did at OpenDNS with this platform, at that company to really help measure the business properly. And so that sort of brought me to where I am today.
Right.
It evolved. Obviously, I started at Fastly. There were 2 people there, working on business systems when I got there. And it was not organized. So I've since sort of rebuilt a financial systems team, a go-to-market systems team, data warehousing and BI. A few months in, about 9 months in, they asked me to take on HRIS, and so I built out that group. And then last year, around September, they asked me if I would start supporting the IT organization. And so now I've got these various groups under me, and that's sort of brings us to where we are today.
That's a very fascinating journey, and I think the rigor that you have from an analytics background probably helps you. And yeah, I think Epic is sort of I think they have some sort of monopoly. I've heard of them, so I think that whole concept of ERP probably started in that world, right?
They are a really fascinating company, but what ended up happened is they built for Kaiser, and once they had Kaiser and they got the government to sign off that this was a really valid electronic medical record that you could use, everyone just started adopting it. And yeah, it's pretty widely used at this point.
Interesting, awesome. So now coming back to Fastly, right? Like if you can share a little bit about like what does Fastly do and what is it selling, and then what does your team from a go-to-market systems support from a sales motion? That'll be interesting because I think it's very fascinating to hear business models and how they sort of get reflected in companies' business systems.
Yeah, so Fastly's a really interesting company. They have a very complex pricing and packaging strategy. So everything is usage based, and that introduces a level of complexity. We basically sell 3 things. We're a content delivery network. So we sort of deliver on behalf of our customers their web assets, and companies that would otherwise have to build out giant web infrastructures to support the number of people who visit their website and download their assets. They use our networks to be able to really bypass having to build out all that infrastructure themselves. That's really our core business right now. Our second piece is security. Once you have this layer in front of your web servers that's hosting your assets, you're going to want to secure that stuff and protect against DDoS. You're going to want a web application firewall in front of it, and so we're really starting to go heavily into the security market, and then edge compute. It's one thing to be able to store all of those assets out on the web closer physically to your end users. It sort of bypasses the speed of light problem, where no matter how fast the internet is, you're always going to run into the speed of light as a limiter to how fast you can get your file, unless you just make it physically closer. And it's one thing to just be able to deliver assets, but if you can actually compute out at the edge like that, you can make your applications much, much faster. And instead of talking about milliseconds, we could start talking about nanosecond response times. And so we recently acquired a company named Signal Sciences. They are a web application firewall, they are a SaaS model. They're not usage based, not exactly. And so now we've got where Fastly was historically usage based, build in arrears on a monthly basis. We now also have an annual build upfront SaaS company that we're supporting. And the usage model at Fastly, it's pretty complicated. So, you look at, let's just use CDN as an example. It's got two primary usage components, delivery and HTTP requests. Delivery is measured in gigabytes, and it could come from one of 8 regions. Across those 8 regions is different pricing. And then within each region, it gets tiered. So, your first 10 terabytes may be one price, and your second is a little bit cheaper, and your third a little bit cheaper than that. And then on the request side, we still have different pricing across regions, but we do something even worse than tiering, which is for every gigabyte of delivery, we may include 1,000 HTTP requests for free. And so now we're doing what I call crossing the streams of usage. And it becomes very complex when we go to either estimate a customer's revenue or even go to bill it, because now we have a lot more calculations to run in order to figure out, they use this many gigabytes, that means they get this many requests for free, and we need to subtract that. And now we're going to do multiple passes of this usage data to calculate what did they actually use that we're going to bill them for. And when we acquired Signal Sciences, we built CPQ to actually support that, Salesforce CPQ. And, you think about that model of 8 regions, let's say 5 tiers on average of delivery, that's 40 price points. And in order for your sales reps to be able to manipulate something like that, you've got to build a custom UI. Behind the scenes, we set it up as each region is its own product, and then there's a tiering structure underneath each product. And we're actually using the discount schedule functionality in CPQ to deal with that. Not the way it was intended to be used, but that's how we're using it. And we can't expect the sales reps to go in and manipulate all of those SKUs as line items. So we built a custom Lightning Web component that they can use that is like a grid. And they can plug in all of the different prices for the different tiers and the different regions. At the same time, we ask them for estimated usage and then percents in each region. We go as far as actually rating that through the quote and coming up with an estimated revenue number based on what did they plug into this we call it a rate card editor, and what is their estimated traffic. And then on top of that, we build in margin calculators. We built in approval estimations based on it. And so that all worked wonderfully for monthly build and arrears products. And then when we brought in a SaaS company, we now needed to be able to quote both this usage build and arrears as well as SaaS build upfront, which could be annual or multi-year. And it took us a little while, but we got that going. Also, the complexity was Fastly historically has been mostly direct. We do have some channel partners, but we're primarily a direct company, but security is much more channel driven. And so when we brought in Signal Sciences, they had a much larger channel program. And so now we're sort of incorporating that channel program into Fastly and figuring out how to make all this stuff work together and really ramp up the channel on the Fastly side as well, just to help us scale and really leverage it. But we're really starting that journey and leveraging a lot of the great work that Signal Sciences did before we acquired them.
Very interesting. No, that's been a fascinating explanation about fastly and also some of the unique ways you go to market. Now, in terms of best practices, right? I mean, projects are complex. There are multiple stakeholders. Like any feedback, Brian, that you want to share, maybe not just from your background fastly, but your prior experience on it. When you're doing these complex code to cash projects, like what are the best practices you should do from a people and a process perspective, not just technology? Yeah.
Sure. So the big one is to get everybody in the same room when you're talking about what you're going to build. And we do that through steering committees. And that was really a huge improvement on once we started getting everyone together in the same room to talk about what we were going to build and prioritize the features that were needed and what really mattered. When we had one-off conversations with sales or legal or even customer support, they all had their own sort of ideas about what was really critical. And we started meeting initially as we were launching. We actually did this every day. We got everybody in the room every single day for like 3 weeks before launch and made sure we heard everybody's concerns, had them doing UAT, and we're really sort of in real time prioritizing what do we need to fix before go live, what can go after. And the really key part of that was when we need to make trade-off discussions, everybody's in the room together to have them. And we're not working in silos, and everybody's voice was heard. And it worked really, really well. And we've continued that. So for CPQ specifically, we have a steering committee that meets every 2 weeks, and representatives from deal desk, accounting, billing, sales ops, legal, and we talk about what's working, what's not, what do we need to do next, and that's been a really successful model for us to make sure both that everyone's aligned on what we're going to do and no one feels like we're leaving them out of the conversation, but also to give visibility into what we're doing across the board, because you kind of have to market yourself as a go-to-market systems team, right? Like if you don't tell everybody what you're doing, like no one's going to know about it until it breaks. And when we go into these meetings, we talk about, this just went out, we see people using it, it seems really successful. And a bunch of that is just marketing ourselves and what we can do to the rest of the organization. And so that's been really helpful. So those are some of the things that we've tried. The other piece that recently we've been doing, which helped us specifically on the product catalog management, is we gave up all control and just told product, you tell us what order you want products to get launched in, and we will do them in that order. And if anyone comes to us and says something different, we're just going to point them to and having a real owner of that that's in the business was really, really helpful to not have, sales reps or sales ops coming to my team and saying like, when is this SKU going to launch? When are we going to do this? When are we going to do that?
Right.
And we just say like, ask product. They're the ones who own this stuff. We just do it in whatever order they tell us. And that we sort of officially put it out there that like they own this and we don't really have a say in it. We just sort of do what they ask. That's not entirely true, but it's what we tell everyone. And it works pretty well.
Those are really good pointers. Thank you, Brian. So we're almost at the end of our conversation. So wanted to get some idea. If somebody listening in who is early in their career, right? Let's say a business analyst or is maybe a application developer, like what advice would you give them? What should they be thinking so that at some point of time, as their career evolves, they can also try and lead a business systems team? Like, what are some of your recommendations?
I think one is there are multiple entry points into getting into business systems, from project management to going the traditional route of trying to get all your certifications in order um, and applying with certs, hoping you can get an entry level job. Um, I'd say that's sort of the first one is find out what you really want to do. Uh, and, I have like a project manager on my team right now who came in, loved managing projects, but has decided she wanted to become more technical as she started learning more of the ecosystem. And now she got herself certified and she's actually in the system every day, making changes. Um, and the other thing is right now it's a great time to get into the Salesforce world. There's not nearly enough people, and
Right. Right.
the more you can get yourself out there, get involved in communities, get involved in the Salesforce ecosystem. Um, you, it's a great time to sort of get into that world.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, those are all really feedback. Thank you, Brian. So with that, I would really like to thank Brian for his time today. He's been really open about sharing insights about Fastly, about his personal journey, and also some feedback towards the end of how you can think about getting into business systems and thriving in your career. So thank you, Brian, for your time.
Thank you, Protik. It's been great.
Awesome. So with that, I would like to wrap up this podcast. Thank you all for tuning into Reimagine Enterprise Sales Systems. To listen to more exciting podcasts, please visit my website, protikm.com or protikm.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, and other channels that you follow so that you'll never miss your show.